and welcome to episode 4. We are talking about German attempts to have a large sphere of influence around the world, so much better to start off with German beer, which is seen, frankly, everywhere.
And let us not forget, this is episode 4, which means we've had more episodes than New Labour won elections.
Oh!
So suck on
Boom!
that, Blair. Suck on that.
Boom! We've had more episodes than Reichs that Germany has had.
Yes. So frankly, we are much better than the Reich and New Labour put together.
And the Nazis added into that. But that kind of goes without saying.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving swiftly onto the
matter in hand.
Yeah, onto the.
We left you tantalising in the last episode with the end of Von Bülow.
The end of Von Bülow and
the Daily Telegraph.
The Daily Telegraph.
So Remy, what was the Daily Telegraph affair, and how did it bring down the Bülow?
Well, very simply, it was the Kaiser having an interview with the Daily Telegraph affair. He was, of course, Queen Victoria's beloved brother, relative.
Blood relative.
He was interviewed with the Daily Telegraph, in which he expressed a wish for close ties to Britain. And the Kaiser, this actually seems like a very reasonable thing to say, but the Kaiser was in fact criticised for making statements on foreign policy to the foreign press without authorization.
In fact, imperial consent.
Which in itself shows that it was not, an entrenched authoritarian state. But there were calls in the Reichstag to have constitutional limits enforced more so on the Kaiser, and thus Bülow was in a tough position as
he had a bit of a dilemma.
He'd actually cleared the article before its publication. The Kaiser was just able to go, well, it was simply Bülow's fault.
Bülow basically had a choice. On the one hand, he could stick by his Kaiser and say, Wilhelm should be able to say what he likes. And he was accountable to the Kaiser, so on the one hand that's quite a clever thing to do, but on the other hand he needed the Reichstag to pass his legislation.
Exactly.
Didn't want to anger the Reichstag, which was increasingly, had increasingly full of democratic parties.
And
what choice did he take?
Well, Bülow initially sided with the demands of the Reichstag, not the Kaiser. But he kind of said to the Kaiser, "Yeah, okay, I won't do it again." And it seemed to peter out to the whole crisis. But in 1909.
When was the crisis? Just to check, it was in the winter of 1908-1909.
Yeah, sorry,
to confirm. But later on in 1909.
Yeah, the Reichstag rejected Bülow's budget.
We had a bit of chat about this last time. I hope you remember.
Yep, and
a bit of troubles with debt. Feels like 2012 all over again.
It is, and it was an excuse for Kaiser to basically ask Bülow to leave, to resign, since he'd lost the support of him. So it showed that the Chancellor was really accountable to the Kaiser alone again, it was that was the end of him.
Yeah. So a little bit of a summary on Von Bülow. He managed to stick it out for a good 9 years without kind of just wiggling his way through, really.
Yeah.
Just playing on the Kaiser's support when he could get it. Flattered the Kaiser.
Complimented his moustache.
Yeah, and his hat. Got broad enough support for Weltpolitik, but he didn't really have any real sort of conviction, any real political base, which kind of showed with the Daily Telegraph affair. He, without the Chancellor's whim, or without the Chancellor's support, which was always a bit difficult to secure, he was pretty much nothing, and that's what we saw. Now, moving on, we have a new Chancellor in 1909.
Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg.
Possibly the best named Chancellor ever.
In my opinion.
Bethmann.
It is Bethmann. It reminds me of many men I know called Beth.
Yes, indeed. So, what kind of situation did Bethmann see himself in?
He was a conservative, but he had real trouble up to 1914 because the Bülow bloc, the Conservative parties, had collapsed. And if we move on very quickly to the 1912 Reichstag elections,
these are seminal, big elections.
They were the SPT. They 35% of the vote, and became the largest party with 110
which was no mean
seats.
feat, because there was a bit of electoral shenanigans which made it harder for them to win seats. It was biased towards the rural areas they didn't do so well in.
So it was an impressive
feat.
So Bethmann Hollweg's hope for a centrist conservative alliance could no longer could dominate the Reichstag, and thus there was gridlock between the Reichstag and Bethmann's government.
Yeah, a quick note on the SPD. Was there a bit of a split in the SPD itself?
Mr. Ariane Arias once said to me, Remy, the left are always divided, and this was no exception in 1912. His thesis plays out. Yeah, basically Marxists and moderates, or evolutionaries and revolutionaries, whatever you want to call them.
Radicals and moderates.
Yep, they split. Well, they didn't split, but they didn't agree. And most people tended to be in the moderate group, but they nonetheless...
the big difference between the two, one could argue, is that the moderates were kind of less radical in their economic outlook. They also believed that they could win power through, parliamentary means.
Yeah.
Marxists, more left-wing radical in their economic views, and thought they needed to take power now. Now the big... I think it was pretty clear that we were just building up to a crisis. We had the socialists on the one hand, and Bethmann Hollweg, a bit of conservative on the other, without any real support in the Reichstag. And the first sort of mini crisis came in 1912, 1913, with military spending. Well, I don't know if it was a crisis, but a big moment in Bethmann Hollweg's premiership. And we discussed earlier about von Bülow, his attempt to pass a budget. This was Bethmann Hollweg's. What did he do in 1913 to try and pass the budget? I'll tell you what he did.
Yeah, you tell me.
He introduced an inheritance tax. That was a bit controversial.
That was
The rich did not like that. But he managed to do it, and at the same time as raising inheritance tax, he increased the size of the army. The army bill in 1913. It's a big issue in foreign policy, which we may have to cover in a separate episode. We've missed out.
I think we'll
have to cover that in a different podcast.
Shall do.
But big issue there, increasing the size of the army by 20%, which the SPD actually supported, which is not an SPD thing to do. But they supported it because it raised inheritance tax. Exactly. That was an important principle for them, raising taxes on the rich.
Yeah, I mean, the whole financial problem, ironically, was due to the big size and spending on the Navy and the Army.
Yeah.
Which is why I endorsed Costa Rica on these issues.
Yes.
But that's because they haven't got an army, for those who didn't know. But
fun fact for you.
Yeah, fun fact. The Moroccan crisis of 1911, which we will do in the next episode, in fact. So hold your horses.
Yeah.
This just contributed to a lack of money.
So in 1913, in a bizarre twist of events, the socialists were supporting a conservative chancellor in increasing the size of the army, but the conservatives, who are bastions of the army, are actually rejecting an army bill because it included an inheritance tax. So it's a messed up world there in Germany in the early 1910s. However, things quickly took a turn, and the SPD no longer supported the Chancellor when, in November of 1913, we see the Zabern affair break out.
That is Zabern in Alsace-Lorraine,
which is a very controversial province.
Yeah, it's basically a French
dominated,
part of the borders between the two. But basically, French, my people, literally my people. This is one of the few times where I can say it and I mean it, and it is genuinely, semi-factually. There were disturbances between the French people and the German soldiers, and there was 28 arrests, and somebody was beaten down by an officer. So it was all a bit messy. The Kaiser sent in some reinforcements, and there are genuinely big protests in the region, a controversial one. But interesting, because the army said it was only accountable to the Kaiser, and the Kaiser accepted their view on events, and he basically said, the French people causing a nuisance of themselves. You should have kept the order.
Beat them down with a baguette.
Yeah, the army weren't really reprimanded at all. Bethmann Hollweg stood by the army.
That was the crucial thing.
That was it. Because the Chancellor supported the army and the Kaiser, the Reichstag had a vote of no confidence.
A massive
vote of no confidence in the Chancellor. But what happened because of this, Nathan?
Well, the big thing is nothing really happened.
Pretty much nothing.
So Bethmann Hollweg remains as Chancellor, but with a massive vote of no confidence in him, he had absolutely no support in the Reichstag. And we had this situation a few years ago at the end of von Bülow, and we've returned to it now. Basically, stalemate in the German constitutional system. You have the Chancellor on one hand; he has the support of the Kaiser, but not the Reichstag, who are increasingly full of social democrats, centrists, who don't want to just do what the Kaiser tells them to do. And there's we still got financial problems, even though the army bill passed the year before. Still financial problems, and really how Germany is just stuck at this point in 1913, 1914. And this really takes us up to the First World War in terms of domestic issues.
So we will just to sum up, the Zeeman affair showed that the Chancellor and the supporters still had a lot of power, but there's also increasing resistance and popular movements to them, which again comes into fruition particularly after
the people of Alsace-Lorraine protested against the army. They didn't just take it. So that's the end of episode 4.
The end of episode 4. The end of our coverage of domestic affairs, and next episode come back for some German
we'll be going back
policy.
In time to go forward in time to cover you up to 1940.
Back in time to go forward in time. You're lucky you can't see my brain. It literally has exploded.
We are picking up fragments of Remy's brain as we speak. So leave us to that. Hopefully his brain will be back in gear for next episode.
And thank you for listening, as per usual.
Goodbye, Buglers.
Goodbye.